Hello everyone and welcome to the workshop. During the last video, we set up the Pi 5 with the hat drive from Pi, allowing us to connect an NVMe drive to the PCIe connector. So it's only natural that today we're going to be building a NAS with our Pi 5. Before we get into building a little bit of a backstory, I've been using this Banana Pi M2 Berry for a little bit over 6 years now. I just use it to share files between my devices here at home and also to have access to some files when I'm away through my home VPN service. The reason why I chose this specific SBC is because it has a SATA port. It has been working pretty well since I set it up, but the transfer speeds are not that great. The years just went by and I never touched it because it was just working. But now it's due for an upgrade. So today I'm going to be replacing a Banana with a Raspberry. I'm going to be running Open Media Vault, or OMV for short, on the Pi 5. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be much faster than this old Banana Pi. But how does it compare to the Pi 4? Or how does it compare to other SBCs that are not named after a fruit, like the Rock 5B? For this build, I'm going to be using a Pi 5, a microSD card, a Pi hat drive. I have a video on it linked somewhere here. And an SSD drive and this 3D printed case. The reason why I still have the SD card listed is because OMV doesn't let you use the same drive for the files and the OS. So I'm going to be installing the OS directly on the SD drive, but then my files are going to be hosted on the SSD drive. And of course, you also need a PSU. I'm going to be using the official Raspberry Pi PSU, but you can use any suitable PSU. I'm also going to be using the active cooler, but it's not really needed for this kind of build. But it's only $5, so why not? The 3D printer case is designed by Adafruit that I made a small modification to be able to fit the hat drive to the bottom of the case. So shout out to Adafruit for providing step files and making it super easy to edit the design. All in all, the setup cost me $144. So here's the breakdown. A Pi 5 8GB is $80, hat drive 128GB NVMe was around $15 on Amazon, SD card $8, PSU, the official Raspberry Pi PSU $12, and I'm adding $1 as a symbolic amount for the 3D printed case. This is a pretty slim build with 128GB of storage. I only use it to transfer files between computers here at home or to have access to some files while I'm on the road. So if you need more storage, you can find a 1TB SSD for around $70 on Amazon. So that would bring your build to about $200. So it's still pretty good. A quick note about the case: although it's a great design, access to the power button is fiddly at best. You would have to stick something in there to have access to the Pi 5 power button. In my case, I'm going to be using it as a NAS and it's going to be on 24/7, so it's not really an issue for me. I thought about using the official Raspberry Pi case, but it doesn't have the slot for the PCIe cable. I could leave the lid off of the case, but then that kind of defeats the purpose of putting the Pi 5 in the case in the first place. Now that we have all the hardware set up, let's take a look at software. Like I mentioned, I'm going to be using OMV. OMV is compatible with ARM computers, unlike other NAS solutions like TrueNAS, which is not comparable with ARM. So OMV makes it super easy to create shared folders and make it available to all computers in your network. To get OMV running, you have to install the Lite version of Raspberry Pi OS. OMV is not compatible with desktop environments, so make sure to choose the Lite version when you're installing. A word of caution that bookworm support for OMV is still in beta, so like I said, I'm only using this to share files in my network. If I was using this as a backup solution, I wouldn't be using beta software. After you have Raspberry Pi OS Lite running on your Raspberry Pi, it's time to use the command listed on the screen to get OMV installed. It's a good idea to have the network cable plugged into your Pi 5 at this point. When I was installing OMV, I kept running into errors and I realized that it was due to the network configuration part of the install script. So I used the command that you see on the screen now to install my Pi 5. I'm guessing that I'm not the first person to run into network configuration issues, and that's why they have parameters to bypass that in the install script. By the way, I have all of the information from this video linked down below in the blog post, and it has all the commands and everything that you need to set up OMV on your Pi 5. And after OMV was running, all you have to do is go to the admin page and log in with admin and open Media Vault as the password. The first thing that I did was to go to the user section of the admin page and create a brand new user and set a very secure password. The drive that I'm using for the files was already formatted, so I was able to just mount it. Easy. From here, I created a share folder and I gave permission to my user to write and read files from this shared folder. Peasy. Finally, I enabled the SMB service so I can access the files from any device here on my network, including Windows devices. Lemon squeezy. Speaking of Windows, here we are in File Explorer, and all I have to do is either use the Pi's IP address or the host name to get to my files. And I just have to enter my credentials and voila, here we are. On Linux is just as easy. I can just add SMB at the beginning of the file location and enter my credentials. I can also edit FS tab and make sure that my drive is getting mounted when the system boots up. So let's talk about transfer speeds. I ran some tests and the write and the read speeds were saturating the 1 gigabit network that I have here at my house. The speeds were hovering between 850 and 900 megabits per second. But do you really need the M.2 drive plugged into the hat drive to get those speeds? It turns out you don't. I unplugged the M.2 hat and I used an SSD through a USB adapter and I got the exact same speeds. Even though the speeds are not better with the M.2 hat drive, I think I still like the setup better. Just because it's one unit and it doesn't have the cumbersome USB adapter attached to it. And it fits nicely here on this shelf in my network rack. And you must be asking yourself, what about the Pi 4? It also has gigabit Ethernet. Are the speeds the same? Well, I tested that out. I removed the SD card from my Pi 5 and the USB SSD and I plugged it into my Pi 4. One thing that is nice about Raspberry Pi OS is that you can just unplug from one Raspberry Pi and plug into a different Raspberry Pi and it just works out of the box. The read speeds over the network on the Pi 4 were exactly the same as the Pi 5, but the big difference was in the write speeds. The write speed on Pi 4 was about half the speed as the Pi 5. So compared to the Pi 5 using the USB adapter, the Pi 5 is still much faster for writing files to your NAS drive than the Pi 4. So for comparison's sake, I got my Rock 5B out and I also set up OMV on it using the exact same SSD drive. I have to say setting up OMV on the Rock 5B wasn't as easy. I first tried setting it up on top of the image provided by Ragza and that didn't work. So I had to download Armbian, but then I didn't know the Armbian by default doesn't boot from eMMC, so I had to write the image to an SD card and then install OMV, and then everything was working fine. The transfer speeds over the network for the Rock 5B were exactly the same as the Pi 5. That just goes to show that the limiting factor is the gigabit network on the Pi 5. Keep in mind that the Rock 5B does have 2.5 gigabit and an onboard M.2 adapter, so there is no need for a separate adapter like the Pi 5. But I don't have a way to test if the Rock 5B would be faster over the network because I don't have 2.5 gigabit networking here at my house. But that might be the theme of a future video. So now that we know the transfer speeds, let's take a look at power usage. All of the systems that we tested here range from 4 watts to 6 watts on idle. So based on the rates here in my area, the difference between a 4 watt system and a 6 watt system over a period of a whole year is only $3. So yeah, less than a coffee from my neighborhood coffee shop. Hold on a second. You want more? You want me to compare the Pi 5 with a mini PC? Well, turns out I did. So, of course, unsurprisingly, the speeds were exactly the same as the Pi 5 because everything is being limited by my 1 gigabit network. So, if you're only planning on using your Pi 5 as a NAS and you only have 1 gigabit network, the Pi 5 is definitely the winner over the mini PC because the mini PC cost me $50 more than the Pi 5 setup, and the energy consumption is also quite a bit higher, almost double. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think about a video in the future comparing the Pi 5 to a mini PC? Anyway, I think this is it for this video. I'm pretty happy that I have a faster system now to transfer files between my devices here at home, and I'm definitely going to be experimenting more with the Pi 5 in the future. So I'll see you guys in the next one.